boy.
Wrong boy. Oh, God.
Where's your boy? Boy, my
You're
boy.
all right, boy.
My boy is up on the mountain.
Boy. What up, punks? Welcome back to another episode of the Pop Culture Punks podcast. I'm your
Boy.
host, Phil, and across from me is your boy.
Is your boy. Josh.
And this week, we're going to be talking about the number one father in gaming, Kratos, the God of War.
Super dad.
The new God of War game, although it's not really new anymore. We're a little late to the game.
About a year.
About a year, yeah.
Longer.
It came out
last year.
Last year, February or something like that.
So
maybe we're over a year at this point. But
yeah.
we finally both got around to beating it, and we're here to talk about it today.
Yes. Dad bod.
There's no news or updates or anything, mostly because
This is going to be
a delayed release. So
April 20th.
yeah.
So we're a couple months later.
So we're a couple months, yeah.
A little after a year.
So I think I beat it last year. I don't remember when I beat it. I was late to the game too, but not as late as you were. So I'm curious, having just beat it, what is your initial impression? And then after that, I'm curious why you waited so long.
Yes,
I'm curious, like
that's
I'm
a good
just
question.
Not in like a snarky way, but like what kind of
What took you so long,
what prevented you from getting to it?
Those are all really good questions. First, real quick, because I know we're kind of shifting this to do it in the beginning and at the end. For all your Pop Culture Punks needs, go to popculturepunks.com. That's like a new thing, so we're still trying to get used to it. But this is also going to be in the future.
This should be coming out in August.
So by the time you hear this, we'll probably have done this like 15 times, and it'll be fine. But
so it won't sound like we're new at this.
Exactly. Every destination is linked on popculturepunks.com. Every link to Redbubble and Threadless for merch is linked on popculturepunks.com. Creative writing stuff that Phil and I will be doing in the future will be linked on popculturepunks.com. And if you'd like to submit any feedback, topics, questions, concerns, thoughts, jokes, memes, etc., you can send those to popculturepunks.com/contact. And that's it.
Boom.
All right. So to go one at a time to those questions, because they were all fantastic. So your first question was, what did I think?
Initial impressions,
and then what was the delay, correct?
Yeah. So I guess you can do those
two?
in reverse order if it makes more sense.
I will do that. So my initial delay was one, I think, when it came out last year, there was a lot of games. I think that I was really excited for it and it looked awesome, but I think I still kind of had this, I don't know. I don't want to say I was like snotty about certain worlds, but I think I just had my game vibe that I liked. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so excited for Cyberpunk versus maybe how excited I was for The Witcher is like medieval stuff and fantasy stuff is cool to me, but it's definitely not my favorite setting. I'm way more into like the futuristic, not necessarily like sci-fi, like space and aliens, but just like, I think of like Mass Effect or like, like Mass Effect, Cyberpunk stuff. Things that are more like psychological and tech based, like I think that's more my bend. Yeah. So like Deus Ex and stuff like that, or just straight out cartoony things. So I think part of it was with it being very grounded in Norse mythology, and I know with all the other God of War games, it's very like medieval and axes and stuff. Like it's not like in the future or something, and they're doing it. So I think that wasn't going to keep me from playing it, but I think that was one of my like I'm not craving diving into this world.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If that makes sense.
I think I was in a similar boat. I mean, I personally love The Witcher, and I'm a big fan of both like techie sci-fi stuff and fantasy stuff. But with this one, I think it was maybe a little bit more just of it being God of War. Yeah. And I think for me, God of War has never been like a top tier franchise. Like it was never a system seller franchise to me.
Definitely.
But then this one came out.
And all the reviews. And
like, I remember seeing the gameplay reveal and thinking, like, what in the world is happening?
What did you do?
Is this the same game?
Right.
Like,
yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah, I feel you. It's
for sure.
It's definitely stylistically.
Yeah.
Like, it's not really fantasy, but it's like the Norse,
which
is kind of what fantasy comes from.
Yeah, exactly. And I will get into that because I think that would be... that's more in my first impressions. Yeah. And I think I have some thoughts on that. But... yeah, so I think it was initially the vibe. Like I'm not as drawn to the medieval kind of like swords and axes and
swords
fantasy,
and sorcery,
like the like the fantasy style. And I think the other thing too was flat out like I think I was just swamped, and I think I had a few other games that I was playing through.
2018 was a big game.
It wasn't Didn't Red Dead was out
Red Dead
at that
came
point?
No, Red Dead came out in the fall.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember all the games that came out around that time. Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the Game of the Year contenders,
Right.
it was like stacked.
Yeah.
And Assassin's Creed came out, so a lot of open world, a lot of time commitment that we probably didn't have.
No,
so,
and I think that was the biggest reason, honestly, is I think I just like, I think of like last year, and other than like Spider-Man, the little bit of Red Dead I played, Pokemon Let's Go, there's a handful of games that I spent a good amount of time with, but 2018 was probably probably the year I played games the least out of like probably my whole life, which is kind of crazy when I thought, because I never thought that it would ever happen where I'd like not play a bunch of games. Whereas this year, I think now we're like starting to do more, like we did the Gears of War episode. We're starting to do more specific content based episodes versus just like talking about things pejoratively.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, I was like, I know I'm going to play this game and I know I'm going to get it eventually, but I think it's hard to justify $60 at this point in time when I know that I'm not going to get to it right away.
Yeah.
So
Which is interesting because after having played it, I would, like, as soon as I finished, I was like, I would have paid $60 for this.
Yeah. Oh,
which
absolutely.
is funny. So it's kind of like in retrospect.
Yeah. So I think it was just like a lot of it was just timing, and then just kind of like where my palette, my gaming and world palette was at
that makes
the time.
sense.
So I picked it up on Black Friday in 2018, and I was like,
$20, right?
Yeah, it was like $20.
Boom.
So
Easy.
which that is highway robbery for this game, and we'll also get into that. But this, man, I can't believe I waited this long to play this game.
That's how I felt too.
Jumping into impressions, like I should have played this game as soon as it came out, and I should have poured. I'm bummed partially because I kind of had to, I don't want to say I sped through it, but I know like there's a lot of side stuff with Zimri and Brock, and there was like some other things, like there was that weird spirit guy who you have to like get his wife's soul or something that's like in limbo, and there's these different things that I really wanted to do, but I just was trying to rush through it and like, you know, getting to the end, and now the Valkyries opened up and things like that.
I think there's a new game plus mode now.
Yeah,
which there wasn't at the time that I beat it. So you could always go back to.
So exactly. So what I'll probably do is I will probably do that in the future. Like if there's like a dud year, which I don't think is going to happen for like 30 years.
Not
so I might,
like it,
I literally might be retired by the time I get back to this game. But I think this game deserves every single accolade it has gotten. I think unanimously. There was nothing about the gameplay, the world, the characters. There was nothing that felt off or wrong. Yeah. Like I enjoyed
like such a smooth experience.
Gosh. Yeah. Just like the axe throwing mechanic and the combat, which I was very skeptical of. Not necessarily that it couldn't be done, but I think gameplay is one of those weird things where when you're watching someone do it, I think people love to nitpick and be like, "Oh, that looks dumb." Like I don't want to do that until you have the thing in your hand and you're aiming and throwing the axe and calling it back and going into these combos and with some of this, one of the other things you get later in the game, which like I knew about that earlier, but like the story context around that, I was it's just like so cool. But yeah, this game was incredible, and I know we'll be diving specifically in this episode into like the storytelling in the game, but I'd love to hear from your perspective, because this is a hard game and this is a very combat heavy, like open world game, but with a lot of lore. So like when you played it, what was the draw that kept you hooked, and what were the things that really stood out to you?
Man, I think first my favorite part, actually I'm going to step back a little bit and just explain a little bit of the history around this and why it's kind of like so amazing. But so I think before this there was 3 God of War games.
Yep.
And then a bunch of like PSP peripheral stuff, which were kind of like top down, like isometric almost, like hack and slash games.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the correct term for it, but like fixed perspective, like or whatever. And so this game, I think they spent 5 years developing it. And I think my favorite part that they changed first was the continuous perspective camera. Like it never jumps into cutscenes. It never jumps like it's just crazy. Like no other game has done this. And like
it's insane.
I remember like after playing it thinking like like judging every game based on like
Yeah,
that thing. I'm like, man,
right.
I kind of wish every game did this now.
Yeah,
like the seamless transition between.
You're never ripped out of it ever.
Yeah, and I think that was the first part for me that was so different than the other games was that it had that perspective.
Sure.
And I think that helped a lot with the storytelling because you never felt like you weren't a part of the story. Like it always drew you in. I think the other part that kept me going, pretty much everything that kept me going along was like not the gameplay aspects, which I'll get to that, but I think the other part was the characters, especially like the little head that you have on your waist, and like
Mimir,
some of my favorite parts were just like going around in the boat and him telling stories about like different things about like kind of like giving you the history of the like basically like teaching you Norse mythology while you're like just going around in this boat. And definitely. Like kind of like his little interactions with Atreus and different little moments that made the world feel like it was alive and breathing and like you were actually participating in it. Yeah, and I think, which we'll get to later too, but I think the story overall just like kept dragging me along. Like I want to know what's happening. And kind of like that storytelling element that really shined in this game. But yeah, I think for me the gameplay wasn't necessarily the weakest part because I think the whole package is just so amazing. Yeah. But of all the things, the gameplay was my least favorite, mostly because I just don't like third-person games as much as I like first-person games. But I think the combat was so fluid and so smooth, and it like in some ways it felt like Spider-Man, where like I just kept wanting to like chuck the axe and like do all these different things, and I never really took the time to figure out combos and stuff because I'm not good at that sort of thing. But that was one of the things that literally blew my mind, and I think would be one of the main things to actually draw me back. Because now that I've experienced the story, there's part of me of, do I really want to go back and play this? But I think diving into the abilities and everything, it was unreal how many things are actually combo based and how you can actually tie things together, because those were some of my favorite moments when I accidentally did combos that were meant to be stringed, and then just seeing Kratos doing like the heavy swing and then he's like knocking a guy back, and then I would do like the thing where if you hold R1 he just like lets it spin, and then he's like grabbing it and then like wailing it down, and then you can like do like it was just those moments where in 3 swipes, I've just did this whole move set, and this guy is just decimated. And the combat just felt so cinematic too.
Oh yeah,
like every combat instance you were in felt like you were like participating in a movie. Basically,
you're like let's freaking go.
Dope.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think because of that, it never got old. It never felt like, because even in The Witcher 3, as amazing as that story is, like a lot of the times you get kind of stuck in the combat. Like the combat in that game is clunky sometimes, and like doesn't always feel quite intuitive, or like sometimes your dodge doesn't go the way you want it to, or sometimes the sword doesn't feel as powerful as it should be, and all that stuff. Whereas in this game, every moment of combat just feels so fluid and strong, and like you feel like your axe is actually as powerful as it is. Right. And granted, I played in easy, which probably helped.
I did too.
Play a little bit in part with like making it easy. Yeah. But there were a couple battles with like some of the Valkyries. I didn't do any of like the big ones because I tried to, and I got my butt kicked on the first one. But I did a couple where I forget what you're trying to collect. There's like some item that helps you upgrade or whatever, and there's some Valkyries spread throughout the map that are like easier, and if you defeat them, they give you stuff. And those were like, it was basically like
the easy ones,
and then
like,
somehow that steps up to like hard, like in the Valkyrie fights. But there was a couple I could beat by like cheesing the system and stuff. But yeah, there's like, I can't think of any moments where I felt like I was pulled out of the world. And I think that's usually my favorite thing about video games, is when I can feel like I'm participating in the world and not getting lost in like mechanics and different things. Like if I can't notice the gameplay mechanics, and I think that's like a benefit for it. And I think that's the biggest thing I think this game did really well.
That's a really good point, because I think of all the times that the cutscenes are seamless. Like it just kind of pans out and then it goes around Kratos and then you're right back in it. And I think on top of it too, there's a lot of upgrading. There's a lot of skills you can manage. There's a lot of things you can change in with the armor and whatever. But I never felt confused as to how to do that. And I think with games like The Witcher, that's one of the things that I think has kept me out of it. Is from like the 15 hours I've played, it's incredible. But I think it's one of those games where unless you're going to play it for like at
you really
minimum
have to be
of 50.
devoted to it. Yeah,
Exactly, because you really have to know not even just how to beat enemies, but literally how to actually functionally
it's very
manage
like
your inventory.
It's very
and all that
role
stuff.
playing esque. Where like gotta okay, this sword is this weakness for this monster, and like
exactly,
you
it's
have
like
to do a
bare
lot more
bones.
planning and all this stuff. Whereas God of War is more streamlined in the sense of like your weapons kind of do the same thing for all different enemies and stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely two games trying to do different things. And that's anything. But I think yes, as a game that is trying to be simplistic and straightforward in just a relative sense, like not that it is simplistic, but just these are your weapons, beat the snot at everything, progress.
And I think
get stronger.
That balance between storytelling and gameplay is unmatched by a lot of games.
Oh, hands down.
In The Witcher 3, like the story is amazing and the gameplay is fun and the open world is amazing and all the different mechanics are amazing, but because of the scale of the game, it's hard to make the story feel like it's progressing at a natural rate.
Yep.
Because like I could just go off and do 20 hours of random stuff.
And you're like, oh yeah, my
back
daughter.
To my friend who's been
right.
looking. Yeah. Like I don't have to look for my daughter if I don't want to, even though like
that's the pressing.
It's the pressing matter. Same thing for like Fallout 4. Like you could ignore looking for your son for like 100 hours if you want.
Right.
Whereas with this game, you still have the choice to kind of explore and do stuff, but that urgency like really feels real in a sense. And like
definitely.
And obviously it's not a fully open world game, so you can't really veer off. But I think they did such a good job with making it feel like you got the best of both worlds in a
definitely.
sense.
Yeah, because there was that taste of it being an open world that. I've always felt it was linear enough that I didn't ever feel confused or lost, but it was open enough that I understood the scale of the place that I'm inhabiting, and I didn't feel because I have a love-hate relationship with open world games that I feel like most players do, at least recent ones where it's just full with nothing or it's just so big I am overwhelmed and I'm kind of scared to even jump in because I'm going to spend 5 hours running around and I'm going to make like maybe a 0.5% progress. And there's almost like a futility.
If you have like an expedient schedule where like I only have a certain number of time to play games and I don't have 5 hours to just waste doing nothing.
Right.
It's nice to have a game like God of War where it kind of like gives you some choice, but also pulls you along. Like it's a good compromise.
Definitely.
Still is I think I put maybe 50 hours into that game when all was said and done.
Yeah, I want to say if I had to guess on easy, just kind of going straight through the story.
Yeah,
like
you were
I just beelined. It was probably close to like 15, 20 hours at that point. So, and I would say like the first half, like with the story stuff, takes a little bit to get going, and not in terms of like dragging, but I think the story missions themselves are longer before you get the completion marker. But then once you get to the second half, it really picks up. But talking on before we dive into the story, because I know that's our main discussion, the boss, I loved one of the things that I absolutely loved about this version as well is even though they've revamped so much of what made the first 3 God of War games iconic and just the bombastic style and stuff and like the angry god and doing all this like crazy stuff, they did not remove the absolutely insane fights.
Yeah, the boss
like
fights.
Just some of the ones with like the trolls and stuff, and like how every ogre and every troll that came out, I was like, bro, you don't even know.
Yeah.
Like just like running up, punching him in the face, grabbing the giant stone out of the air and like ripping it down, or like the ancients like punching him in the in like the magic chest and ripping their heart out and stuff. Everything was just still, I felt like I was still playing a God of War game. Like even though it's matured, I would say that's the thing. It literally felt like this game was a post-college grad version of the like hormonal high school version of the original trilogy. Yeah. Where it was just like, it was awesome and it was rad, but it was just like, like it was very just violence and bombastic for the sake of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the boss battles were some of my favorites in that game. Just the combat and the way that they integrated them.
Yep.
And I appreciated that there wasn't as many quick time events. Like, it's fun to feel like you're participating in the game, like in the old games, but at the same time, like, I would rather just be the person doing the combat rather than pressing buttons to do combat.
Like, timing.
So I like that they added a couple quick time events into it, but I also liked that it was more freeform, like, battling. And
definitely.
Like, all those fights with those giant troll things and like smashing their head with their own club.
Yeah,
was just
or
like,
the dragon fight. That is an amazing fight.
Epic.
And even the second Baldur fight was incredible.
Yeah.
That whole fight gave me chills.
Yep.
Like I was like, this is what a boss fight should feel like. And it was cool because I think for me it was so weird to be fighting a character in it. Like at no point did I ever feel like it was really like difficult, because granted, I was playing on easy because I'm trying to beat it. But I think I felt the narrative weight of what was going on in the fight. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, here's the next goblin god thing that you gotta be like literally chop its head off.
Yep.
It was literally like I could feel, and we'll dive into the story stuff, but there's even some things in there that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing Kratos's and Atreus. I need to stop that. Kratos and Atreus, I'm seeing how they've grown, manifest in this final fight with this, like that story circle, you know, like the very beginning, it's Kratos alone and he just barely makes it out. And then this is the full time around where it's Kratos and Atreus and they just go ham, and it's so dope.
Yeah.
But
I would say probably if I had to come up with something about the game that I had a little bit of complaint about was, before we kind of get into the story stuff, was obviously I think they're planning for a trilogy. So like
that makes sense.
You could tell that they were kind of like, they showed you all of these worlds, but you only got to go to like 4 of them. Well,
and it's like, Odin's pissed, dude. Or like, like Thor.
And I think that's my second thing is like, part of me feels like we only got the B-list enemies in this game. Because I was like waiting the whole time, like, oh, when do I get to fight Thor? When do I get to fight Odin? Like the big gods. But you kind of got all these weird, like, no-name, like Thor's sons. Like, I don't know who these people are.
And they're like complete nerds.
I mean, they were fun. They were fun fights and stuff. But that was probably my biggest complaint. Is like, and then there was like maybe one too many troll fights of like, you couldn't come up with like couple more varied styles of trolls. But those are very small complaints, because even the fights where I was fighting the same enemy again still felt like cinematic and amazing. So
and it goes without saying that this is going to be spoilers. So to jump on that point with the gods, I was surprised that I didn't see, like, there wasn't even an appearance by any of them.
Yeah, did you watch the after credits? Where if you go back to your house, he falls asleep, and then it shows Thor like drop down with his hammer and like lightning, and then it cuts.
Oh,
so you're going to need to watch that.
Well,
it gives you goosebumps. But I think to get it, you have to go back to your house when you beat the game and like sleep or something like that.
That makes sense.
So I didn't do it either. I just watched it on YouTube.
Sure. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Because I think that was something that I was genuinely surprised in, because Mimir starts telling you, you know, and it's Baldur and Thor's 2 sons, and I'm like, oh snap, like there's gonna be some brouhaha happening in here. But that never happens. And as I'm thinking about it, that may be the genius of where this trilogy is going, is based on that panel when they get to Jotunheim,
like the giants.
Is that right? Like the big realm with like the hand or whatever. That last panel that Kratos sees before, or that Atreus doesn't see, but Kratos sees, where it's like Atreus holding Kratos. And I think
that last scene makes sense.
Yeah,
why they ignored some of the aspects, but
because I feel like, if anything, this could, if executed correctly, which I fully trust them at this point with how they did this game, I could see this being one of the most incredible trilogies in ramping up the stakes of like, because I think I could see them almost having a better executed Mass Effect style story.
That'd be interesting because I don't know if there's ever been a trilogy of games that has been like universally praised. Because I know Mass Effect is like praised, but the third one is usually
there's a lot of controversy depending on.
But
if
they could like pull off this trilogy and like be like a universally praised franchise,
that'd be crazy. And
I mean, obviously they won't be praised by Xbox. Fanboys, but
whatever. but I think to that level, I wonder if one of the things that they're planning is to save the big Odin fight for like God of War 3, and so to use the like the tier of gods as even a storytelling element of like. You've had to earn the ability to kick Baldur and just destroy him. So now, okay, game 2. Here's some of the other enemies. Here's some of the other guys. Here comes Thor. So maybe Thor will be the Baldur character in God of War 2, and then 3. I could see that being the full on throwdown of like, and the end of the cycle. And I think
like
because of
Ragnarok.
that, and I think because of that, I didn't mind not seeing the other gods
Yeah.
because I felt like if they would have thrown so many gods in there, it would have taken away from what the story is about, which is a father and his son.
Which I agree with.
Yeah.
I think, in my mind, that's like a maybe 1% gripe.
Definitely.
Of like,
and I think it's...
I was hoping for Thor, but I know based on the story that we're not going to get him.
Exactly.
And so
At
I'm
least
excited
that
for
realm.
it after
Definitely.
seeing the after credits scene
For
on
sure.
the game. So
Yeah, definitely. All right, story. Dog. This is one of the... Because I ranted at Gloria the day I finished it, which I think was Monday or Tuesday night. Like we went for a walk and I just like spewed my guts and I was like, and they did this and the story's like this and there's this moment and blah blah blah. So I was geeked and I said this and I think I'm gonna stick to it, that this may be one of the best, if not the best, narrative game I've ever played.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever felt this impacted by a story since like The Last of Us or BioShock.
Yeah, I would say it's up there with like that echelon of narratives, and
like it just crushes it. It's crazy.
Woo, it's so many elements that are going in. Like I think that's the part of it too, is that it's not just like with Mass Effect. Like that's one of my favorite stories ever, but it's not like an amazing story, and I want to be careful because that might freak some people out. But I think the Mass Effect story is like an amazing conclusion. It's an amazing overarching thing, but I think it's like a one-off journey of a man learning about himself, learning about his son, learning about the world he inhabits, learning about his wife, like just being a character. This was one of the best narrative
and I think from a story perspective too, like it's easy to think of story as just like the thing that's happening.
Yeah.
But I think
yeah.
story is composed of like setting and characters and plot and all these different things that this game just meshes. So like while you're experiencing it, you don't realize all of these pieces that are coming together. But when they like come to fruition, like one example I think of is the arrow, like the green arrow in the end when that like ends up being a thing, and you're like thinking back to this arrow and you're like, oh,
that's why Freya freaked out, and like that's why.
And so like there's things like that where you're just like, holy cow, this like they really put time into this story.
Yeah, definitely.
So
yeah, and so to kind of dive into some of the things that stood out. So I think to me one of the things that this game captured so well is the human expression of everything that's going on. Like how they actually did the body language for Kratos and Atreus, and how they actually did the facial animations, and like you're watching a movie, like flat out. If they just made this into an animated movie with like the narrative moments and scenes, I think it would be incredible. Like it's, you know, I think I said it earlier when it was kind of like we were teasing this episode in this discussion, but that moment in the very beginning of the game where they're looking at the mountain that they think they need to climb up, and Atreus is like, man, I wish Mom was here. And he's standing in front of Kratos, and we're looking at Atreus and Kratos from behind, and he like very gently like is about to like touch his shoulder as like a comfort, but he like can't do it, and he just is like, let's go, and he's just all business. And so I want to say it was Corey Barlog that I heard discuss this, and I it might have been some of the other writers who were helping with it as well, but I think how they navigated writing a character that is known for just being kind of like this this humanless brute. Like he's just like, he's your average like macho male fantasy guy.
Rage,
yeah, exactly. Like, I'm gonna kill the gods. Like you're like, yeah, you know, like he's not nuanced or like whatever. And so to turn him into, frankly, one of the most nuanced characters ever, and to see how they did it was very inspiring from a writing perspective. But sorry, I don't want to ramble too much. So to give a specific example, so one of my favorite moments is, I can't remember where, it's early in the game, but it's one of the times that Kratos and Atreus went to see Freya at her place.
The turtle.
Yeah, so they're leaving, and Atreus has been, I think it was after they went to the Light Temple, where it's like the very first temple you go to with like the flying dudes, and they're leaving after going there and going back to Freya, and so you're leaving Freya and you're going, I think, back to the mountain to when you run into Mimir. And Atreus has been kind of snippy because he had the moment where Kratos stepped into the Bifrost and he was like following after his wife, and you know, he like Atreus rips him out, which one was ballin' because Kratos comes out and he's mad that like Atreus ripped him out, and then he like looks around and there's just tons of these dead things everywhere that you've been seeing, and you're like, oh frick.
Yeah.
Like this kid is an unawakened power, and so that's that first taste of it. And so Atreus has been snippy with Kratos ever since that moment, and he says another remark where he's like, you don't feel anything, like you don't care, like he just dives right at what everyone thinks and probably does feel about Kratos at that moment, is like, you don't feel anything, you don't care about anybody or anyone. And Kratos right back says the truth, which is, do not mistake my silence for lack of emotion or feeling. Or he just says something to the effect of like, me not saying anything and me not being like, I'm so sad, does not mean I'm not feeling anything. He's like, so hold your tongue. And so still Kratos, still his like brute, gruff self that doesn't know how to nuance, like, son, I know you might perceive my my lack of, whatever.
Yeah.
But he just says the truth. And Atreus and Kratos both say exactly what they're thinking and what we're thinking, and they just dive into it. And it was just like, that just doesn't happen. That just doesn't happen in stories. Like, people actually saying what they feel and like them all having to like work it out.
Yeah, and I think for me that's one of the biggest things that made this story feel so impactful was they set up this internal and external conflict that Kratos has with himself and with his son.
Definitely.
Of like, he has somehow left behind his past because he found a wife and now he has a kid, and so like he's basically like, I need to be a dad for this kid that is no longer the god killer, like the violent, angry parent or the violent, angry man that I once was. Like, I can't be that anymore.
Yeah.
But we also live in this world ruled by these vicious gods who like
are out
to kill us.
Yeah.
And so like I also somehow need to train my son to defend himself but not be violent.
Right.
And it's kind of like this conflict between like violence and anger and kind of tempering that. And like you see that with Kratos internally, because when you get to the scene where like they see the ghosts on that flying ship of him killing his father or whatever, and Atreus is like, what was that? And he kind of realizes, like he almost realizes how violent his dad was, and kind of like seeing, and you kind of like you continually see this progression of Kratos trying to raise Atreus in a different way.
Definitely.
But the world keeps throwing things at them where they have to be violent, and it's kind of like, how do you become a not violent person in that way? Or how do you like temper your anger and still be able to like survive in the world?
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's one of my favorite parts about all these moments where they like create this conflict between them. So
yeah, and that's a great example too, because before that moment, because they're in Helheim at that point and they're trying to get out of Helheim after Atreus essentially kind of ruined what was going on, or just caused more trouble. And why that whole thing happens is because Atreus gets sick. He's essentially more or less dying, and the sickness is because Kratos hasn't told him about his godhood, and so because of that, his body is like basically imploding or something like that. Like it's self-destructing. And so Freya, I thought, was interesting, and I'll address that in a second of a follow-up, but how Freya, I think, is how they used Freya as a foil to Kratos was like probably one of my favorite parts as well.
Yeah.
And her character and Baldur and stuff like that. But Atreus is dying, and so Kratos has to go and kill this troll thing and cut its heart out. Like classic, like brutal thing, has to save his son.
Yep.
And so in that moment, he almost loses his son, and he kind of is. That was his catalyst of, I really need to think about what's going on, because I really do love my son. Because at no point do you ever really see like an urgency in Kratos to actually like care for Atreus. He's just like the trainer. Like he's more like his trainer.
The only reason he's both training him and he's doing it because it's what his wife asked him to do, basically. So
exactly. He's not doing it.
It takes a while for him to kind of actually realize like, I need to father this kid.
I want to do this.
I want to do this. Yeah,
exactly. And so in that moment, they do the healing thing, and so he's healed, and Freya's telling him like, you need to tell him the truth. And I was not honest with my son, or I lost my opportunity and he's gone, and don't be me, essentially.
Which in that moment you don't realize who she's talking
about. Exactly. And you're like, fudge. Okay, well. And so then I want to say it's either right there or when they get in the canoe, and he says like he's not going to say it, But then they go in the canoe, and Kratos just straight up tells him, he's like, boy, you're a god. And he does it. And the weight of that moment is like, well, of course he had to tell him, but it wasn't just like, oh, frick, I don't want him to get sick again. It was more like, you need to know. You need to know the truth. But the reason he hasn't told him is not only because he just doesn't want to tell him and he's trying to train him or whatever, and he just like slipped his mind, but he's afraid of what that is going to do to Atreus. And I thought this was brilliant because it could have been really easy to write it as like Atreus is like, oh, wow, neat. Like, and that's it. And it's just like, he's cool with it, but it goes to his head. Because why? He's Kratos' son. And so now this new news of his godhood, he's like, he, flips out at Zimri and like makes him all upset. And like, he's yelling. He's like, what is it, these mortals and these D-bags that we're like surrounded by? And like, I don't get it. And this is dumb. And he gets a toot all of a sudden. You're like, you're turning into a giant douche.
Yeah,
like
Spartan blood.
Exactly. And in that moment, you see Kratos starting to be like, oh, frick. This is and I thought it was brilliant that they made Kratos' worst fear come true, which it wasn't even that, like, he doesn't want anything to happen to Atreus, but his worst fear is that his fear was like, well, I don't want to tell him because he's going to do something stupid. And so he's like, okay, I did the right thing. I told him the truth. And now he's going out, he's doing something stupid.
Yep.
And it was just like that balance of Atreus being written as a kid. Like, if you're a kid and you hear something that completely changes everything, yeah, you're going to get a big head. Yep. Like, he's not telling, like, his teenage son and, like, so now we need to work on this, or his, like, whatever. And because of that, he literally causes them to get into more trouble, and he kills one of Thor's, like, Atreus kills one of Thor's sons after he makes a comment, and you see, like, Atreus is turning in, he's slowly dipping into old Kratos, and, like, that whole feeling of, like, oh, this just is getting me right in the gut of knowing, like, all the conflict isn't just, like, father-son, like,
you're not as strong as me, boy. You're not blah, 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 blah. You're not as good enough. You're not good enough.
It's literally a dad who has fears. And it's a dad who is the most badass dude in the land who has very big fears about his boy. Yep. And they're all coming true in this moment. And so then that leads into a whole bunch of stuff. And eventually you see Atreus grow and you see Kratos grow too. And so because there's like, the conflict is always pushing their characters forward.
Yep.
But then it complicates it because they did tell the truth. But then they're mad at each other, and then they come back together. But then there's something that throws a wrench into like what they just literally figured out, and so it's just such a classically told story. But anyway, I'm rambling. So that was those were some of my big ones, and then like Freya and Kratos as a foil. But I want to give you some air. What were some of the story beats that really like hit you? Because I know you said that this was like really, you were like, this is an emotional story, and like I dig it. So do you want to dive into?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it's the same thing. It's just seeing by the end of the story, like you see this relationship come to fruition, and I think it's all those small moments where like Kratos is having to reckon himself with his past and like figure out, like you said, face his fears and like, do I tell Atreus these things or do I tell him about me killing my dad? Do I tell him about him being a god? Do I like all these things? And when he does do them, they go badly, just like he thought they would. And so like, but then through that process you see him learning more and more about what it actually means to be a father in a sense. So it's kind of like he's trying to teach Atreus how to like survive in the world and how to like be a not just like an angry violent god but like an honorable one. And kind of like, whereas Kratos is basically trying to learn how to be a father in a sense. And basically the whole story is because he's trying to honor his dead wife.
Right.
And so like he kind of has all these motivators that are pushing him towards the end of the story. And by the time you get to the end, all of these different things that happen lead up to this moment where you see them kind of have this father and son moment. And you're like, man, like this really everything really pays off. And I think seeing the parallel between like the consequences of Freya's actions towards her kid had very different consequences. Yeah. And I think those parallels are interesting too. Definitely. Seeing like, what is Baldur is his name? Baldur. So we didn't say spoilers, but you could just put a tag in it.
Yeah, I always put tags.
It's old too. It's like it's a year old.
For sure.
But seeing like Freya in some ways had a lot of similar choices that Kratos had to make. and she made similar choices, but she waited too long, I think, to tell him, or I don't remember exactly what happened. It's been a while.
So that's something to note is Baldur was aware of his godhood and that was Freya. So Freya is Baldur's mom, and she loved Baldur a lot because she was forced to marry Odin, and she hated him. She had his guts, but then she had Baldur, and so that was like, as Mimir explains, that was like her shining light in the midst of that horrible situation.
Yeah.
So she cared for him, and being an overprotective parent, she cursed, essentially, like in Baldur's mind, cursed him with the inability to feel. So he can't feel pain, he can't feel cold, he can't feel
like
taste.
literally,
He like literally can't feel anything. And so it isn't until the end of the game where he punches Atreus in the chest, and Atreus has this thing from earlier that's like an arrow that's marked that basically breaks the curse, so he can feel, essentially, and he can die. So, but anyway, so that's
I just think the parallel between those two situations,
definitely
adds more weight. Like you said, she's a foil to his character, kind of, and it almost like makes him question his motivations. And then when they finally find out, and she starts to help Baldur, and he, like, the whole time she's kind of been friendly to them, and like, I don't know if they were implying that Kratos kind of liked her or whatever, but like, then all of a sudden she like turns on them because like it's her son, and so you get this parallel between like two parents who are trying to do right by their kids,
exactly,
but one of them is doing it correctly and one of them is doing it wrong because like they waited too long to actually take action. And it's kind of like, I don't know, it just adds up to that final moment where you like see the murals and stuff, and like it's just a slow walk towards like the
like
top
you
of
made
this
it.
mountain, and you made it. And just like the way Kratos and Atreus have become like father and son. Like you start off and they're not really father and son. Like it's kind of like they are literally, but like on the surface they're basically just like trainer and trainee. And like
exactly.
He's just like his only purpose is to help Atreus survive in the world. Yeah. And in his mind, survival is being able to protect yourself, and he's trying to teach him that. And then he starts to realize, if I don't do more than just teach him how to protect himself, his anger is going to get out of control, and he's just going to become me. And you see that happen a lot throughout the story, where with the deer, he makes a mistake and whatever, and then with Thor's son, and then when he pulls him out of that rift or whatever, and there's just all these dead bodies, and like you kind of see him learning the lessons that Kratos is teaching him, but he's not learning them correctly because Kratos isn't teaching him correctly.
Right.
And so like as Kratos is growing as a person, he's also helping Atreus grow as a person. Yep. And so when you get to the end of the story, you kind of, both character arcs come into fruition, and they complement
literally at the catalyst point of like their both of their same goal. Yep. And so emotionally they're at the same level because they've gone through this whole journey together, and they're doing it at the same time at this critical point, which is literally like carrying the mom/wife's ashes to Jotunheim.
And then when you see the mural and you find out what they're really doing, and like the handprints and stuff they were guiding you were like actually hers, and like it's just this moment where even like her character arc finally comes into fruition at the same time, where like Kratos is finally the father and the man that he's trying to be. Atreus is finally like starting to kind of get the weight of the world that he holds on his shoulders. Yeah. Like he doesn't fully get it yet because like he knows what his true name is, but I don't think he knows what that means yet. Yeah. But Kratos does. He's like, oh frick, like that's who my kid is, kind of.
He's like, Mom always called me Loki, and you're like, oh yeah. You're like, snap.
And so I don't even know if Kratos fully gets that either, but like he got the mural and he was like, I don't want that to happen, but it's probably going to, so I need to figure out. Definitely. And it's kind of like hinting at the next game, but you get this final moment, kind of like the climax maybe, or maybe the denouement, I don't know, but where Kratos becomes who he's supposed to be, Atreus becomes who he's supposed to be, and we finally find out who the mom really is, and kind of how that impacts their journey. Yep. And you're just like, it just like wraps up so perfectly, and you're just left thinking like, man, I can't believe they just pulled that off. Yeah, and it's just a video game about destroying things.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like literally chopping Draugrs in half and like pulling giant stones onto the heads of trolls and stuff like that. But I think to that point too, I think I got really choked up at that moment when they're just about to cross the bridge, and it's two moments back to back that are just brutal in terms of, in like a good way of just like the emotion of what's going on in this story. So one of the things is Kratos does have this shame of like where he comes from. And so his arms are bandaged from like the burns of the chains from the Blades of Chaos and stuff. And they get to Jotunheim, and like the first thing he does is he like looks and he sees it, and he just starts taking them off. And Atreus is like, what are you doing? And he's like, I don't have anything to hide anymore. And you're like, oh snap. Like the man has truly grown. Like this is not a, oh, they're kind of dirty and I want to change them. Like he truly understands that he's been hiding from his past and his self instead of embracing it and acknowledging that that's part of who he is and figuring out how to change it. And then right after that, you have the follow-up, which was set up, and it was funny because this was one of the things I told Gloria was, you know, you have this like Atreus every time they keep going to the same mountain that they thought was the mountain, but it really wasn't. And all those times Atreus is like, can I carry the ashes? Can I carry the ashes? And I'm like, he's going to carry the ashes. But in that moment, like I knew it was coming. It wasn't like, oh, whoa, no way. He got to do it. But like Kratos kneels down and he just like he's like reaching for the pouch, and Atreus is like looking off at like, wow, this is cool. And he's just like, boy. And he like turns and he like holds out the bag and he's like, you carry her. And it was just that moment of like, both those scenes, like what we were just talking about, Kratos saying, I don't have anything to hide anymore, is the peak of his narrative arc. Yeah. And Atreus being given these ashes by
as like a symbol of like you're deserving
exactly,
of doing
which
this,
Kratos every single time he asked was like, you're not ready, you're not ready, you're not ready. It wasn't just like, no, I'm carrying it because I'm that way. It was, you're not ready to carry this burden. You're not ready. You're not ready. Mm-hmm. And so at that moment, right after he's had his thing, he then says to Atreus, like, essentially, not in a classic dad way. He's not like, son, I love you and you've made it. Like, let's go across the bridge. Yep. He's like, carry her ashes. And symbolically, he's saying to him, you are ready. You have proved to me that you are ready to carry this thing. And so then together, they meet at the peak, symbolically, all these metaphors, and they walk and they spread the wife's ashes over the mountains of Jotunheim. Yeah. And it's like all this payoff of like this whole 20-hour journey that I've just been on to get to that moment and be like, frick. Holy frick. Like it just was like, there were no surprises. My mind wasn't blown about how crazy, like, whoa, I didn't know it was him behind the whole thing. It was just a powerful story in a fantastical setting.
Yeah,
that
and
just
I think
had so much
just
weight.
Thinking about it now, like the setup of the story is literally just, we need to take these ashes and we need to bring them to this mountain.
Yeah,
because this is where the wife wanted them to be spread.
Right.
But when you find out why at the end, and you're like, frick, this was always meant to happen. Like did his wife have some sort of like power of prophesy or like with the giants somehow?
I don't know. That's one of the details that I'm unwary of, but she was a giant. So I think with that
like half
there
giant
came,
or she was a giant or something
right.
like
So
that.
there was some kind of magical
so like
connection.
They didn't know what they were doing. They were just going like the story was basically they need to spread her ashes on this mountain, which is just a basic story. Like they're trying to honor their loved one. Yeah. But like the whole story is kind of this setup of like a whole mythology of Atreus is kind of like coming into his godhood, and like it's just crazy. Yeah. It's crazy how like small it starts, but like, and the way it starts and the way it ends is the same. Like that they finally accomplished the mission of spreading her ashes, but the implications of the final moment are way bigger than the implications of the first moment. Yep. And so like Atreus finally finds out who he really is, kind of, and Kratos finally finds out why they're actually there. Yep. And then they see that the mural kind of like rips down a little bit, and you see like the serpent and all this stuff, and oh gosh,
just chills. Like I just literally, it was like, and again, I think that was what was so refreshing about this whole game is there was never a moment where I was taken off guard by something, and that was like the big magic, you know, like it wasn't like the usual suspects where you're like, oh, he was Kaiser Soze the whole time. Like I feel like that's what so many like quote unquote quality stories are attributed to, is some kind of big surprise that just completely subverts the whole narrative and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes like you just need a good story about like someone having to face obstacles and every decision not being something that is like, oh, well, now they have to go this way and like do a bunch of fetch quests to, finally be able to get it. Of like, I could let you pass, but now you got to get 30 gold coins and bring them back to me. It was like every moment caused problems, or everything like, all right, we're at the mountain. It's like, oh, but this isn't like, and it's like, oh, dude, this isn't the mountain. And they're like, the frick do you mean this isn't the mountain? And it's not like
and there was a lot of moments where like, if they had written it differently, it would have felt like a chore.
Exactly.
Like, you get to that one bridge and there's like that black mist, and they're like, oh, you can't pass this. You have to get this thing from this place. And you're like, oh, gosh.
Like, really?
Now I have to go fetch another thing. But then that leads into a whole nother narrative arc.
That builds on like
Building
Kratos
into
and
the story,
Atreus.
and like
exactly.
it gives that time to tell the story. And
yes,
you get to hear Mimir talk about like the history of the world, and that kind of like feeds a little bit into the story. And I think there's even a lot of foreshadowing about who Atreus actually is, that Mimir kind of like cheekily spreads into those things and stuff. But you kind of just get all these little tidbits.
He always calls him little brother. I just made that connection. Yeah.
And I think somebody makes a reference to like, doesn't Atreus ask if he can like change into an animal or something? He's like, oh my god, can I turn into a wolf or something?
A wolf? Or,
which like I think Loki is known for turning into a wolf.
Like a shapeshifter.
So it's kind of like these little moments that you get in between those like big gameplay moments, because obviously it's still a game, so like they got to make you like do stuff,
right?
But they never make it feel like a video game. It's always like the story is the prime thing, and the video game is kind of pushing that story along its way. So.
It's almost like they let you take the wheel when it would be the most fun to drive, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I think that's what made this game so amazing, because I think there's other games that are open world or cinematic that it's like, why are you giving me this? Like, why am I driving now? This is literally the worst time that no one wants to do this. Just let me, just do it. Just do it for me. Yep. I don't need to mash this button. I don't need to click this thing. I don't need to run over. I don't need to time this. Just do it for me. I don't care. But then as soon as it's like, oh snap, here comes like 20 joggers and a giant troll, you're like, give me the axe, baby. And then that's the time where you get to have the fun, beating the snot out of everything and throwing it and setting things on fire and doing all these cool moves. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as that, you're like, all right, now we're walking. And you're just on to the next thing. And so it gives you the feeling. It just was great at controlling and knowing what a player would love to do and just jamming the throttle when that was needed and then pulling it back. And then when you didn't have a lot to do, the puzzles weren't like excruciatingly difficult. The way to, because that was one of my fears too, as I was getting into it. I was like, oh frick, is this gonna be one of those like Legend of Zelda things where I have to like go everywhere and do 15 different things to get this one item, and then I'm like coming back to even just be able to do the temple, and like, oh, this is gonna be a ride. Like,
and in some ways, like the gameplay style is similar to that sort of style, where like you keep coming up to obstacles where you need to get an item that allows you to pass an obstacle, which is a pretty basic gameplay loop. But the way that they like intertwine it with how the narrative is told,
exactly,
it never really feels like that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, like from a gameplay perspective, like that's really all you're doing the whole game.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a game, so like you have to somehow fit the combat and the gameplay loop into the story, which I think a lot of other games sometimes either have to pick the story or the gameplay loop. Because even like The Last of Us, like it gets praised for its story, but a lot of the times people just call it like a game, like a cutscene. Like it's just cutscene fest. Like you're basically just watching a movie in some senses, which isn't really true. But I think the way that God of War intertwines the narrative with the gameplay doesn't really ever make it feel like you're playing a game in that sense.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
And I'm sure if I went back and played it again, there'd probably be some moments where I'm like, this could go a little faster, this could go a little slower. But I think the overall package has this feeling where the story just feels like it was just the story. Like they didn't extraneously add anything that was unnecessary in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was telling the moments that were going to be the most interesting. It lingered on the things that actually had payoffs, and it brought us along at a pace that I never felt like bogged down. Like, because sometimes in other games, to your point, like I know when I was getting towards the end of Ocarina of Time, which is a fantastic game, and I really enjoy that and the other Zelda games I've played, but it's a very different style where it's like, it's not narrative, and in the sense that it's like, Link has father troubles and he's trying to do these things, and so it's different. But with this, it was, whenever there was a blockade, I was like, how the frick are they going to handle this? Like, that was always the excitement, is it wasn't like a blockade meant like, oh my gosh, here come 20 fetch quests, or like here comes a following mission. Because there are franchises that I've really enjoyed that those are the cues, and you're like, good God, I don't want to do this right now, because you just know that they're setting you up to do something stupid that you don't want to do. But anyway, my last thing, and I think this is just kind of tying back to the Freya point, and this was just kind of I should have interjected it then, but I loved how you were explaining the Freya and Kratos dichotomy, and I think the other thing too that was fascinating with that narrative arc was that Freya is the one who is the major catalyst to get Kratos to help to grow, and interestingly enough, Kratos is the one who's growing and slowly starting to follow his own advice as he's teaching Atreus, whereas Freya has very wise and sage advice, but she doesn't follow it herself. Yep. And so in the end, because of that consequence, it's not necessarily that Kratos is a better parent than Freya, but because of the decision to actually him choose to grow and for him to choose, no, I do need to do these things better, and I'm seeing the payoff of doing these things better. He reaps the reward of having his son in this epic fight at the end with Baldur, where like I got chills. There's that sequence where it's like one of the more, I think it is like one of the cut scenes, or it's one of the quick time ones where you have to just press the basic axe attack, and like Kratos comes in with like a punch or an axe whack, and then Atreus is like in the air with like an arrow, and then there's one where like Atreus runs up and Kratos like throws him in the air and he's like shooting him, and there was just these moments where it was like Atreus couldn't do this at the beginning of the game, and Kratos wouldn't have been fighting like this with Atreus in the beginning of the game. So to see them as this father and son
at the beginning,
duo,
he would have told Atreus to like back off.
He's like, get out of the way. Here I go. Whereas
but now
this
he's
time,
allowing him to come.
They're
in.
like throwing stuff. And it was just like, this is so wicked cool. And it's that moment that comes with you're seeing this the synergy of these two characters come together. Whereas even in that fight, the synergy between Freya and Baldur is non-existent, and it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where they're at that moment of like, all right, just kill me because that'll make you happy, and I'm your parent and I love you. And it's like, it should have never gotten to that point. But that's Kratos' whole point, is like, do not let this man child be the one who takes your life. Like, he doesn't deserve it. He's made his choice. And then he steps in and intervenes, and Freya loses it and even then Kratos is like, I understand what she's feeling. And even Atreus is like, as a kid and as us, we're like, I'm not a parent, so I don't understand. And he's like, I don't get this. And even Mimir and Kratos are both like, it's like your dad said, like, you just don't know unless you're a parent. He doesn't sound like that bastard. That's the closest I can get. So, but man, dude, that's kind of my final thought. But all in all, like, if you haven't played this game yet, it is 100% worth it.
Yeah,
it is incredible.
I would end on one. If you are particularly a fan of storytelling in video games or any other medium, this game is absolutely worth playing. Yep. If you're a fan of just video games and good gameplay and amazing gameplay, this game also is absolutely worth playing. I think those two complement each other. Yes. But you never feel like the story is overtaking the fact that it's a game. Like it also, it's an amazing story, but it also never feels like you're watching a movie in the sense that like you're going to get bored. Definitely. I think they're always giving you just enough gameplay where you never feel bored playing this game. Yep. Absolutely. So I think for both of those people, it's immensely satisfying. Mm-hmm. The third one, we've said this for a lot of PS4 exclusives, but this game is absolutely worth buying a PS4 for. Yeah, like I would say, like out of all the games, I think this is probably my favorite game of the generation. Yeah, between it's like up there. Red Dead and other games, definitely. But, like it's just amazing. I could after beating it, I couldn't believe I had passed it up. I was like, oh yeah, I can't believe I missed it. Like this game was basically the game that shifted my perspective on how I buy video games. Right, because I was like, if I see a game that I think I'll like and I know I'll like, I'm buying it day one, even if I have to pay $60 for it, because like I don't want to miss out on like having this experience like right on day one. Well, and equal to that too, on the reverse, I'm not going to waste my time or my money on this chaff that is around. Like exactly, so it's not worth it. It made me appreciate what video games are worth, because in my mind I was like, this wasn't 200 hours of gaming, this was like 20 to 40 depending on what you do in the game. How intense. But it's a solid 40-hour experience. Like and I would absolutely pay $60 for this game if I had to go back.
Yeah.
Whereas other games, you could put like 200 hours into it, like maybe an Assassin's Creed game, which isn't exactly my flavor, but you could probably put like 200 hours in those newer ones. And for me, it's just like, I don't know.
It's not worth it.
But like this game is just a solid, like tight experience that's absolutely worth buying a PS4 to play.
Definitely.
Or borrowing one. I don't know.
Whatever. Just make it happen. Make it happen, folks. All right. Cool beans. Thanks for tuning in. This is the last episode of July, so we'll be diving into August. As we said, this is an early recording, so we do not have any for sure plans of what August will look like. As of this moment, we are anticipating we will have a Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode. We will have a RIP episode. We will be discussing difficulty in video games. We're hoping to have That Boy Young Zach, who will be back from Japan at that point, to discuss Neon Genesis Evangelion, my favorite show in the world, said he with no sarcasm. And still possible, we're not sure, but we're hoping to have Linda Berry on at some point this year, who is a renowned comic artist and has been on like Letterman and she went to the same school and graduated in the same class as like Matt Groening and is very prestigious author, writer, artist, and very fun lady. So I really hope that we can make that happen. So thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check out those episodes as they come out in August. Remember, for all your Pop Culture Punks needs, you can head over to popculturepunks.com. Everything, at least in my perspective, is clearly labeled. There is a podcast tab that has episode schedule and destinations. There is a writing tab for Phil and I's creative works. There's a video tab for our YouTube channel, so you can check out our Pop Culture Rex videos and our Punks Plays videos. Our merch tab that links to Redbubble and Threadless, and lastly, our contact page to send us any feedback or anything. And that email sends to podcast@popculturepunks.com. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to us rant about the awesome storytelling in God of War, and we will catch you on the next one. And until then, we bid you a fond cowabunga!
Job security, but I've been dreaming about packing it all up, cause the war in me just won't relent till there's nothing left but dust. So what do you do when the walls start closing in and everyone you love tells you it's all just in your head?